Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Today on Feminine Roadmap, we are going to be talking about the very important and serious topic of domestic abuse. We are going to bust the myth that domestic abuse is only limited to weak, unstable women who are uneducated. Today, my guest is going to blow the lid off of that myth, and she's going to be talking about how it is possible to break the pattern of abuse, to overcome the shame, and change your life. So please stay tuned for this powerful episode. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and I am so grateful that you have joined me today. I have a conversation today that I personally believe is so important. My guest, Dr. Angela Mailis, is an author of the book, Smart, Successful, and Abused. She is a medical doctor and a specialist in pain management. I have invited her onto the show today to share her story and to talk about the very important topic and to remove the shame of talking about domestic abuse. So, Dr. Angela, welcome to my show today. Thank you for saying yes to me.
Hi, Gina. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for coming on today and sharing your message.
I'm here to be heard.
Yes.
And help.
Okay, so why don't you tell me, we chatted a little bit before I hit record, so why don't you tell my tribe a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what led you to write the book, Smart, Successful, and Abused?
Okay, so just for the audience, I am a 67-year-old physician who was born in Athens, Greece, and then immigrated to Canada, where I am in Toronto for about 41 years. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a specialist in pain medicine. I'm a full professor at the University of Toronto. I am a researcher, a clinician, an advisor to the health ministries of Canada and Ontario, and a popular science writer. So from the professional point of view, I'm internationally known for my work in pain. And I have two adult sons. And from the professional point of view, I have done very well and I'm very successful. So that's the first part that your audience should know. The second part is, why did I write this book? Because despite all my credentials and my nickname of bulldozer and holy terror, which I carried in the medical school and throughout, I was involved in an emotionally abusive relationship with my first husband and the father of my two boys for a period of 27 years. So I managed to terminate the relationship in 1995 in an extremely stormy, dangerous, and extremely expensive divorce over 1 year that shook me deeply. And after that, I started talking about what had happened to me, because I had never talked about this before. And I was very surprised when I realized that there were so many other women who would say, oh, me too. Oh, me too. And they were lawyers and teachers and nurses and doctors and senior bureaucrats in the Ministry of Health. All of these women like me, extremely successful professionally, who were in abusive relationships or had been there. So what I did what I do always as a scientist. I started keeping a ledger of cases and cases and cases I was coming across over the period of years. And I said, oh my God, this is not just me. This is an endemic phenomenon and nobody speaks about that. So then I took it seriously as a project. I did research, I organized forums, I reviewed the literature, I did another research project And finally, the book, I think it was in the make for about 17 years, collecting cases. And finally, I had to get it out in the press for one simple push. A female physician whom I did not know was murdered in November of 2016 by a famous neurosurgeon husband. Her husband was a doctor, and he was my colleague. We had worked for years in the same hospital, and none of us had any clue that he was a different person at home. He killed the wife, and after that, I felt compelled to get the book out. So that's the story behind the book.
So you had a colleague who murdered his own wife because he was an abuser? Is that what I understand?
Exactly. And I was working with this colleague because I have been for 33 years. I was the head of the pain program at the University Health Network in one very big hospital downtown, the Toronto Western. And I was working with Dr. Samzi for 4 years. We had set up programs together. We had common patients because he was neurosurgery and me pain management. And none of us knew anything. He had a major Facebook page with lovey-dovey, all these pictures with him and the wife for years, over the top. And next thing I know, and that's the opening, the preface in my book, I almost had a heart attack when my staff called and they said, "Did you see? They just got him in the police. Did you see what the press says?" I almost got post-traumatic stress reaction for nights. I couldn't believe it. My patients couldn't believe it. My staff couldn't believe it. So, and then there was all kinds of things that came out in the press. It was a major, major case in Toronto. It made even international headlines. And he was a very talented neurosurgeon, extremely smart, talented, and unique in his job. And he was married for 12 years, and he was beating the shit out of this woman. And she was an extremely bright woman who was involved in the Ontario Medical Association. And he killed her because she had told him she was divorcing him.
Wow. Wow. That's one of the things that makes it scary to talk about, isn't it? Because there is the threat of violence. There is the threat of death in some abusive marriages. But I'm wondering, because a lot of women make excuses for the men in their life. Well, he was upset. Well, we were having an argument. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't start generally that dramatic, right? How did the abuse start in your marriage?
Well, the abuse was never physical, or I should stand to be corrected. It was physical one time, and I would like to bring this point a little later. And I took a decorative shovel off a wall and I said, "You touch me again, I will cut your head off." And it never happened. And I will bring this back again because I made that observation. I made it after the book came out and I had more women talking. And then I had an epiphany, and I will discuss that even some of us who are in the grips of emotional abuse have drawn the line. I won't accept the physical abuse because I had other women. I'll leave you or I'll hit you back. But the emotional, I'm not so clear about that. Is it really, does it have a name? So, but 50% of the women I have talked to in the grips of emotional abuse are also physically abused. So let's not confuse the things. Emotional abuse for most of these women is the prelude to a physical abuse. What we have to distinguish between emotional and physical abuse is the physical abuse occurs in episodes, in spells, a black eye, a bidding, this and that after a conversation. The emotional abuse is like a poison that gets under your skin. It could be overt, it could be covert, it's insidious, it poisons the victim to the point that the victim does not even know what is normal and becomes completely desensitized. And so it is telling that a year after my acrimonious divorce that made it to the Ontario court as the worst divorce in 30 years. So I had that. My secretary gave me a book from Patricia Evans, who had several tables about signs of emotional abuse. So she had about 7 points, and she said, if you have scored yes in 2 of these 7, consider that you have been emotionally abused. I scored 5 or 6 out of 7. So I ran out of my office and I said to my secretary of 30 years, who was the only friend I had throughout these whole years, I said, do you know what was happening to me? I was emotionally abused. Can you imagine? 27 years plus 1 year, and I discovered after that that the name of what I have was emotional abuse. Bright. I didn't even know it. I knew, and I will describe the stages that I went and how I knew that I had to go out of the marriage, but I didn't even know it. So there are numerous other women who live into that situation, and they don't know it. And this is when I was getting cases after cases after cases, and I was pulling commonalities between these cases and differences. I finally ended up lining up 2 chapters in the book. One is, who are we? Who are these women who get involved into that? What is in our background? And then the other thing that I addressed is what makes us vulnerable and what kind of techniques or things we use to remain in the marriage. For example, as you said, one of these, oh, it's not bad. My thing was, oh, well, he's not beating me up. Maybe he's not working, but we have some good time. So it's okay. Could be worse. You know, this is a faulty logic that we use to rationalize the irrational. Even when we are called names, oh, he was angry. Oh, he was tired. Oh, he was this. The excuses we give, and there's a whole list of excuses and techniques we use, we invent to justify that kind of behavior. So,
and coping, right? I mean, it's a coping skill too, because you are trying to understand what's happening, right?
It's a coping skill, and this is why you use all of these excuses, not only to somehow stay, but also to justify your staying. In my case, and it took me years to understand, mind you, now I have clarity, then I didn't have any. My parents, because I met my ex when I was only 16 years old, and my parents opposed bitterly from the very beginning, opposed. And of course, later on, I realized that one of the reasons I wanted to stay so much in the relationship is to prove them wrong, because I was so stubborn, you know, young, and you want to go the other way just to prove to them. And of course, just walking out of the marriage and say, well, I failed, I took it as a personal failure. It's, you see, we were telling you that and you didn't hear it. That's one of the reasons. And of course, there are hundreds of other reasons why women stay, but we can talk about that as we go through this conversation.
It's really interesting to me. I have always used the analogy, especially when I talk about abuse, and emotional abuse, because it doesn't leave physical scars. That's what makes it so challenging to identify, because I believe everyone says things they shouldn't say when they're mad. You know, I hear these conversations, right? And it's like boiling a frog. There's something that those men know to say and do, and they know when to test and how much to test. So it's like you put a frog in cold water and you just slowly turn up the heat, and you just keep slowly turning up the heat until the frog is boiled, and the frog doesn't even see it coming because they've been acclimated. So let's talk about how an abuser acclimates their victim.
First of all, one of the characteristics that I have 2 groups of people that I remember. Once I was out of this and I would see, I became the scientist I always, in the sense, oh, this is a phenomenon, let's study it. How often does it happen? To whom does it happen? What are the reasons that it's happening? What are the social environments around that? So one of the things that I saw from very beginning from many of the women, so there are 2 groups of people that I looked at. One was in a forum in 2008 in my home, and I had about 10 professional women, almost all of whom had been in this abusive relationship. So we recited the stories, but I had prepared questionnaires. I had prepared a lot of homework for them before we got together. One of the common things, we were all in between 40 to 50 years of age, all professional women. One of the things that came out, many of these women met their partners in a young age. So one of these things, and I was one of those, one of the things that popped up, and there are many that popped up in this conversation, is we didn't have any experience. We didn't know. So, and there were several women who did that at a young age, and I can associate with that because later on when I visited my homeland Greece many years ago, we were 8 couples that graduated, from high school, 8 couples that were married in a very young age. 6 out of the 8 couples had been divorced. So one thing is you are very young, no experience, you don't know. That was one of the things that popped up. The second thing that popped up in these women, the first group, I'm talking about middle-aged women because then I will go to the young ones. Many of us had immigrant roots. Canada and the US have a very large immigration stream. We bring different cultures, people from different groups, ethnic groups, different education, different values, different religions. We are a mosaic of different ethnic groups and cultures. And one thing that popped out very strongly from the older group was the cultural background we had. Because it's not the color of our skin. It's not the accent in our voice. Culture is deep in the bone. It's the way we view men and women, the way we view our position in the environment, the way we talk to our kids, the way we know what is permitted, what is not permitted. And it became a lightning rod in the group of the older women because many of us were immigrants or first generation born in Canada but had immigrant parents. So many brought things like, you keep your dirty laundry under the rug. This is all your private business. You don't talk. Or marriage is a sacred thing. You don't break it. Good women don't live with their husbands. We brought all of those things. Or what is the environment, the friends, the parents, I will say. Many reported on their religious group that was opposed, instead of supporting, opposed to the dissolution of marriage, even if the marriage was a very bad marriage. So all of these things came from, and I saw that in the first wave of these women. And so that's another factor that came. And of course, there were all kinds of different factors. For example, women that were brought up in an abusive environment, that they witnessed abuse or family feuds or had an alcoholic subject at all. This created scars that they carried for life. Another thing that we noticed for some of the women is if they had stopped being children, we had some women who took care of an ill person, either a person with a mental health issue or with a medical condition in the family as young ones. So they had to play the role of the adult. They really skipped the joys of childhood, and they had numerous needs that remain unmet. And they had developed dependency needs, thinking that the partner was going to cover them up. So these things were coming up one after the other. Other thing that came up from my original form, or the middle-aged professional women who had fallen in the grips of abuse, many of those were out, some were not, is what do we do with our children? And when I took a poll of that, about 60% of the children, because when we have children in the marriage or in a relationship, who's going to take care of them? Primarily the woman. Primarily it would be the woman who will care more for the children in a divorce. She would be the one to care more. Even in those situations where there was 50-50 custody, the woman was still doing the lion's share. I can remember unpaid bills and all of that, on leaving the kids the last moment. So the woman had to change her holidays because the partner was not in the mood to take the children. On the other hand, the strange thing is that some of the children grew up to sight with a male parent, the abuser, because they felt that he was an underdog. The woman was the one who was the disciplinarian. The woman was bringing money at home because all of these women were major or primary money makers and bringing money at home. So about 60% on that group, 60% of the kids were our kids and everything was okay, and about 40% had maintained bitterness against the woman for breaking the marriage, despite the fact that the woman was the primary caregiver. And another thing that transpired out of these original conversations, the money issues. But the money issues are very different than your regular abuse, because these women were all professional. We bring money at home, and some of us are primary breadwinners, as I was. So when there is a split, who pays the bill? I had to pay alimony. The acrimonious divorce takes you to the cleaners. It's the woman who is losing tons of money. Many of these women lost homes and all of that because many of these women had to support the spouse because the spouse was making less money. So all of those things came from the original grown-ups form of women who were all professional, and they were in the grips of this abuse or had been. So I'll stop here for a moment, and then we'll continue to younger groups.
That's interesting. You talked about two things that popped out in my mind, where they were as children. Actually, three. So one, when we talk about culture can be national, right? What country you come from. For someone like me that is far removed from the immigrants that came to America, we also still have a form of culture, right? It's the people that we surround ourselves, the things our family believe and that sort of thing. So I definitely wanted to bring light to the fact that somebody might be saying, well, I don't really have a culture. We all have a culture. It may not be national, but it may be emotional, familial, community. That's right. Yeah. The people that you surround yourself with. So really evaluating the culture, if you will, the community, what is impacting the way that we think. And it's influencing the decisions that these women make, because we don't, as humans, want to step outside of the norm because it's painful. It's almost like there's a pain sliding scale, right? Which pain is worse? And like you said, when somebody goes through a divorce and it costs them money, oddly enough, it's like, I don't want to go through all of that. I know it's going to cost me. I would rather stay here and be abused. And you had mentioned that you didn't have the clarity and you weren't aware, because you see, when you're successful, you have a goal. I think you have something you're going for, and it fills your self-esteem cup at work. So maybe they have a better capacity, for lack of a better term, to cope with it, because over here someone's telling them you're the gal that just handles everything and you're amazing. Maybe that puts smart, successful women at greater risk, because they do have the balance of accolades, money, and popularity, whatever. So maybe it gives them, in some weird sort of way, the ability to kind of bear the burden of that emotional abuse. Like it's almost like a teeter-totter in their life. And the third thought that I have was, the dynamics of, you get these men who think, I know this is a complex issue, but I would think it would chafe against a man to make less money than his wife. Doesn't it kind of inflame? It's not an excuse. It's an observation that they're inclined to be an abuser, but now they're less than because the woman is more successful and smart and well known. So now he has to basically create a balance, like almost, I call it peeing on your territory. You know how people peacock, and it's like they want you to know I'm the man, right? So I feel like that might be in there somewhere. Am I right?
100%, and I'm going to report on research on that. It's not just your intuition. There is heavy research on that shows this. But so you picked up all the right things. And then let me just go back on a few steps. In the first bout of these women that I had seen, including myself, because you go through a lot of digging when you're out, you take yourself away from the situation, you become an observer, and you look at the subject that was the you in 27 years, say, what happened to me? So one of the things that came out across as one significant factor why some of these women, including myself, were involved in these relationships is low self-esteem. And many of these women had low self-esteem for 1,000 different reasons. And I do go in details into my own path for that. But when you have low self-esteem inside the house, because the typical thing for these women is they are split in two tracks. They are two selves. The very successful one, the women who run the boardrooms and the organizations out there, make the money. And then the moment they get into the house and they close the door behind themselves, they become another one, a timid woman who has a lot of unmet needs, and you think you're going to get them in a partner who is not really giving you that, but is really putting you down. So one of the primary reasons that we saw in many of these women is that many of us had low self-esteem. In my own case, I never liked myself as a woman, not as an intellectual. It was never an issue. I was on the top of my class forever. But since I was a young child, for whatever godly reason, even if I grew in a very loving environment, I was always an isolated a kid who couldn't make any friends, who was always feeling alone from a very young age, and I never liked me. I had a very distorted view of who I was as a woman. So when I met my ex, I felt lucky that he would look, he wanted to be with me. So that was one thing. And the other thing that, of course, was a kind of attraction is that in most of these women that I had interviewed, they had fallen for the bad boy. That was the bad boy factor, was another one that I dealt with, and it was a personal issue for me too. But a part of the low self-esteem, because I look at women to try to find what were the inherent weaknesses we had that made us prone to this. So low self-esteem is one thing. Codependency is another one. This is the one thing when I said somebody grew with unmet needs because they grew in an environment, they stopped being children, they were looking after somebody sick, or things like that, or people who had grown up in an abusive environment, they have developed a distorted self of themselves. And then these women also, another factor was we were afraid of being alone. That's another factor which is quite substantial for people like us. Other women said we had lack of experience, and this is where getting very young into relationships where you don't get burned, you don't get rejected early on because that makes you tough, is another issue that can make you fairly kind of weak. And then shame. A lot of shame because we can't live, because our heart is weak, because we have all of those things and we keep that relationship at home. We lie to the people outside. We're in shame to say, I'm failing here. Like exactly what I said to you for myself. I didn't want to say, well, I'm giving up, because then everybody will come and say, we told you so. I didn't want to hear it that we told you so. And then, of course, there's a tremendous amount of pressure for several of these women from family, religion, religious denomination, friends, whatever that might be. And it doesn't have to be, as you said rightly, culture in the narrow sense. We come from a certain nation, we have a certain ethnic groups. No, culture and microculture is our environment. I had some women who came from a very wealthy Anglo-Saxon, multi-generational families. Their culture was the high-end society, the private schools of the kids, fitting in their clubs. Breaking this pattern was now breaking that kind of cultural circle, and didn't have to be Greek or Italian or Iraqi or something like that. So these were some of the things. And then the other thing that we found out from culture, from certain culture, mega culture now, you come from certain ethnic groups, and what is abusive in North America is normal for some of the things there. When I was back home and I had gone for a visit, I saw a cousin of mine that I have not seen for many years, and the husband asked for a coffee, and then he was screaming, "Get your fat ass, give me my coffee, quickly, what are you doing?" And then screaming at her because she was tending to the grandchild. And I went to my sister and said, "What the hell? This is a plain pig. This is an abuser." I said, No. He's a very good man. He's just a screamer, because many Greeks or whatever, Italians or other, are just used to screaming. So for her, it was different because it was part of the general kind of culture. For me, that I had been now sensitized to North American liberated culture, I went back and I said, "Are you kidding me? Now for us, it's abuse." And I have a Pakistani, very smart woman who is my PhD research associate. She looked at all the signs of the emotional abuse and physical abuse and she said, Dr. Mailis, most of my people will check positive in this emotional abuse thing, but they will say they are not feeling abused because this is part of their culture. This is what they're going to tell me. And another indicative thing that I put in the book is that we North Americans think, for example, that Saudi Arabian women are abused because they have to wear restrictive clothes, they can't drive, they stay at home to raise the kids, they are chattels for the men. Well, Saudi Arabian women look at North American women and they think we are abused because we don't have large family support. We have to raise the kids on our own. We have to go and work out, work to bring money at home. So we are the abused ones. So this is where what is norm for a culture plays a huge significance, particularly when we're bringing in a lot of immigrant populations.
True. When you get that melting pot that I believe North America is a huge melting pot, it creates a very unique conversation because our tolerances vary based on our experience, our family culture, our national culture, you know, the groups that we run in. I totally agree. Now, to be fair, there are some women who are abusers, but today we're going to focus on, you know, women who are abused by men because abuse is not just limited to men. There have been some pretty horrible women out there that have abused men as well. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And you have also to take that to the LGBT community. You have to take it to the indigenous community. You have to take it to the elderly. And I have men who are emotionally, even physically abused, but we are talking about the majority, and we happen to have the lion's share as women. One of the things that I don't want to miss, and it dawned on me as I was doing my research, is that we may have a biological vulnerability to be softer. And I dwell on the issue of empathy. Empathy is feeling for you. So I'll give a number of experiments. They did experiments in some very close couples, and they gave, for example, an electrical shock in the hand, which is painful, in the hand of the subject. And they measure their brain waves. And at the time of shock, there were waves that were very strong. So what they did, they took couples and they give the electrical shock to the man, and they measured the brain waves of women. Several of these women had the same oscillation in their brain at the time that the man was accepting the shock because they felt for him. But when they did the opposite, what do you think the man did? Nada. So they would not reciprocate that. So women are more prone to feel for somebody else. And actually, a colleague of mine in Montreal did experiment in little mice because she wanted to find out if empathy was only something that is seen in humans. And guess what? She put little mice who have grown up in the same cage. They're called cage mates or buddies. So male and female. So if you put a male in a situation of pain, they have certain ways. They do injections of some chemicals in the tummy, and the mouse starts jumping. The female cage mate that watches the mouse jumping, she jumps too because she's distraught. If you reverse the order and you give the painful stimulus to the female mouse and the male is watching her, what do you think he does? Nada.
Interesting.
So what I'm trying to say is that we have a few biological inherent factors weaved in us. They did a huge study on 8 countries, children from age 7 to 11, and they had a number of questions that show whether they have empathy. The girls, across all cultures, scored much higher than the boys. So the mere fact that we feel a lot more for the other person make us also more vulnerable. We have a bigger heart. And that's another thing that I had never heard before, but when I started pulling the research articles from humans and animals, it became very obvious. And also as women, we're naturally pleasers and nurturers and rescuers. we take people's problems and we make them ours. And finally, the ones who would be more concerned for the children is us. Why? You see, most of the women, it's a natural instinct for us to take care for our kids, where most men is more of a learned behavior later on. So what happens is that we would be the first ones to say, well, if I break the marriage, what are my kids going to do? And that was one big thing for me as well. By the time, of course, I kicked the bucket, the kids were 8.5 and 10, but I had to go. And so these are all the factors. Why are we staying in? What are the things that make us stay in an abusive relationship? And I cited many of those.
I'm wondering, Dr. Angela, is there kind of a dynamic in some women where they are getting some kind of twisted value? Do they feel like they're providing some kind of service to this poor man who grew up in a family that just, didn't love him? Or is there some kind of role that women see themselves playing in these relationships?
This is where, and I have a little paragraph for that, a little chapter, as pleasers and rescuers. We take these people's problems and we make them ours. We are the ones who step in and solve the issues because they can't do it themselves. We feel sorry for that, and we take all of those things, being their family, being their money troubles, being their own things, we're the rescuers. So that's one part of the many reasons why we stay behind.
So it's almost a bit of a, I can't quite find the words. It's almost like being a superwoman or being some kind of like a superhero. You're doing this very wonderful thing for this man. Because see, I'm going to reveal something in my family. I had an uncle who was abusive, and he had 2 wives. He married one twice. And then the woman that he dated, he was very, very verbally abusive to her. I witnessed it. And his oldest sister, which would be one of my aunts, my mom comes from a family of 6, she defended him to the death, even though he had been cruel and unkind to her as well. She was the oldest child of 6, and he was number 2, and she covered him no matter what. We got into a discussion one time because he had physically bumped me. He wouldn't let me say goodbye to my grandmother when she moved out of state. She was in a wheelchair. I wanted to give her a hug, and he wouldn't let me. And he probably weighed about 300 and something pounds. So he physically was bumping into me. And I always thought that was interesting. And later on, the conversation happened with my own mom that my uncle, I guess, was picked on as a kid. So my aunt became the protector, and she never left that role. Now, her own husband, she didn't repeat that pattern. She had a great marriage. But I thought it was interesting that no matter what he did, no matter how he treated people, she would always run to his defense. And so for me, having had the background that I had, being raised, my mom fled an abusive marriage, which was very courageous, by the way, because it was one of those I will kill you types of guys. And then to watch that defense of someone in my life where it's like, this guy is a jerk, but you'll make every excuse. So I really began to ponder early on, why do some women make excuses for men they know darn good and well? It's not like, well, they just make excuses for hideous behavior, physical and mental and emotional abuse. And back to what we were saying earlier, emotional abuse and mental abuse, they're sisters, true? They are slightly different.
Yeah. Well, they are, however, intertwined, because you have to think of the gaslighting effect from the movie Back with Ingrid Bergman, where you play with your sanity. For example, he was flickering the abusive spouse. He was flickering the light, and he was telling her that she was imagining them. So you shake somebody's mental balance and you make them doubt for themselves. So the mental, the emotional, go really hand in hand in this situation. But one point that I want to bring here, and I don't want to forget it, I asked a colleague and friend of mine, a psychologist who was reviewing the draft of the book, and I said, Tony, you know me for so many years as colleagues. Tell me why did I have low self-esteem, or why did I fall into this double track? Why did I get into that and I'm this professional, blockbuster out there that everybody knows, who doesn't take no for an answer, doesn't have any patience for nothing, and then you go home and you become this. He said, my feeling, and this is the consensus of most psychologists who deal with the abuse, is that somewhere in the early years, women acquire some vulnerability. And he gave me a very good idea that some of these women missed unconditional love at home. And so we grow up, we're smart, we go out and we earn conditional love, because the workplace will reward you for your achievements. You do well, you get promotion. You do well in your research, you become a professor, you publish. So the outside world rewards us for our accomplishments. And that's conditional. So we arrive in a high level because it's conditional upon our achievement. We go back home with unmet needs where you look for unconditional love and you don't have it because you have a partner that puts you down. And of course, you're already low, you go even lower down. So I like that concept that the workplace offers us conditional love, and this is where we strive. We have the weaknesses, we go back home, we close the door, we're another self. We look for the unconditional love that we missed growing up early, and we can't find it. And so that was one thing. The other thing that my friend psychologist told me, and I thought it was a very interesting concept, is the mirroring concept, a mirror. Mm-hmm. And that will relate back to what you said for that aunt of yours or whoever who could not see, could not hear, no matter what. So what happens with most of us, because I was a defender of my ex, out of the 27 years, maybe for the 22, I was blind and deaf. Didn't want to hear, didn't want to see. I was not ready. And then when I started becoming aware, it came with occasions. What prepared me for that is where I could see myself in different eyes in a different situation. You remember I spoke to you about low self-esteem that I had since I was young? From what I look at, I look at my pictures, I was a beautiful young lady, tall, slim, and all of that. I couldn't see that then. And so what happened is, and that is in the book, how I started my recovery trip. My ex was a fitness buff. So after having two kids, back to back, 17 months apart, and working 60 hours a week, of course, I was deconditioned. So he kept goading my looks, and you're this and that, and you're not training. I said, how? You don't look after the kids. I have to return after a long work. I have to look after the kids. I can't take 3 hours, 3 times a week to go to the gym. Get me a machine at home. So in February of 1992, I was at that time exactly 40 years of age. He brought an order track machine and he set it up in the room of one of my young ones, a ski machine. I was falling off the skis every 2 minutes. He was sitting at the door and he said, you see, you can't even do that. I'm going to give it back. So I said, okay. Of course, I got pissed. You see, in those situations when they put you down, you have two ways, either to go down in a deep hole or get angry and get out of that. So I got angry. And that was a very constructive, not destructive, constructive anger and slow burning resentment. I stuck with the darn Nordic track. Every night I would come back. I got trained. Within 3 months, I was down 2 sizes. By 6 months, I was in an exceptional shape, and I started liking who I was. And then I went to a trip back home that I had not seen my classmates for 25 years. And the way they looked at me, they had never seen a babe. This is what they said. These are Greeks. Who in her 40s, she's looking much better than I was looking at 20. Short skirts and high heels. And I had fallen in the meantime in love with aerobic line dancing. And I brought fitness into my life. And once I brought fitness into my life, I started seeing me differently. I started liking me. And that was a huge push for me. And just to make the story short, even after my divorce, I fell in love with martial arts. 13 years of martial arts, a black belt in Taekwondo, gym. To this date, I ride motorcycles. I'm a Harley rider. To this date, fitness was my savior because it allowed me to see me in a different eye, and I saw me in the eyes of my colleagues who had not seen me for 25 years. So that was my mirror that brought back self-confidence as a woman, not as an intellectual, as a woman that I didn't have for that many years. So that is a mirror effect. And I met a lot of women who were able to listen to themselves by hearing other people's stories. Only then they started clicking and clicking and clicking and making sense. And there are several stories in the book that speak about this phenomenon.
When you were talking about conditional versus unconditional love, I think that creates a loop. You know, you go out, you get all this conditional love and you get that cup filled, but it makes the unconditional feel empty. So you go searching for that again. And then that doesn't get filled. So you go back to kind of puff yourself up with the conditional love. And it's like, it's kind of that, instead of the confidence competence loop, it's the opposite of that, right?
Yes, you got it all right. You got it all right.
So the mirroring, it's interesting because we do have mirror neurons in our brain, right? People that we're around. So when they say birds of a feather flock together, there's so much truth to that, because the people that we're around, like you said, you went home and they mirrored back to you something you didn't see. But the mirror began to, it's like you began to clean the mirror. You actually began to recognize that, no, this is the truth. And I think for women that are abused, that's the challenge, is to clean the mirror, because there's a cracked mirror, there's a dirty mirror, there's a deceptive funhouse mirror that they're living with, right? That man is reflecting back at them things that are not true. They are not real. But like you said, it messes with their heads, and they begin to really think, well, if this is my husband and he says these things, it must be true. That's where that sanity thing comes in. And when you talk to a woman who's going through it and they're like, you know, why didn't you call the cops? Well, I don't want to do that to them. I wouldn't want, and I'm like, you don't, okay. So the reason you would call the cop is because they hit you. But you don't want to call the cops because you don't want to do something to him. Back to the empathy. It's like we're inclined to bear the burden, bear the burden, bear the burden, bear the burden. And this person may not even be a martyr or a victim in their mind at that moment. They really think they're doing something noble.
That's right. Correct. We do things not because we know the truth, but we live in a faulty, manufactured truth. We tell all of those things to ourselves to the point that we believe it. And this becomes an intense coping mechanism, because if you take that away from yourself, all your paper world that you have made is crashing. If you take away all of these excuses we tell ourselves, you can't live there. And of course, I reached the point of where my paper tower collapsed, and I could see, and I said, what the hell? How did I get here? How do I go out? Because I fell in severe depression. Once I was able to see, I said, holy God, how did I get myself in here? And the worst, how do I live the marriage with 2 young kids? But on the other hand, how in the name of God I'm going to live another 30 years with a man I don't respect in this terrible situation? I have to get out. So you go into that depression. I did for quite a bit of time. And then I finally found the courage to say I'm out, because the pull to get out was stronger than all the feelings. How am I going to deal with my kids? What am I going to say to my environment? The pull to get out was much stronger than that. And I did get out.
What are some coping skills or some strategies that you used, and maybe you didn't even realize it at the time, because you said you live in a manufactured truth. So you have these paper walls, these paper houses that you live in, and regardless of how shabby they are, that's the quote safety. That's the quote reality that I'm so emotionally attached to. How does a woman shift and rebuild a life, not repeat a pattern?
Okay, I can tell you, because remember, I'm a clinician researcher. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm not a trained journalist. I'm just talking from what I lived and the phenomenon that I studied. In my own situation, I lived years in this manufactured world. And in the beginning, to remain in that world, and for many years, every time there was an outburst and a put down, the first thought that was coming to my head, oh, I did it again. Oh, what did I do? How did this happen? And I was trying to find what I did and what I needed to do to appease him, taking as granted a fault of mine. That went on for years. I don't even know for how many years. And then I went through stages. The second stage was where the truth started into, hold on a moment. That particular situation, it doesn't make any sense. It can't be always my fault. Then I grew through that second stage where I was questioning now how much was my fault and how much was his fault. And as I was going through this stage, I was realizing that most of the things were not my fault. So that was my stage 2. My stage 3 was a phase that sustained me, which I call constructive anger, coupled with slow burning resentment. Once I realized this was not my fault, and I was really taken for a ride, and that was towards the last few years of my 27-year relationship, I became a very angry person. I was rebellious. If he was talking bad to me, I would talk bad to him too. But of course, all the other binds were still remaining. But it was the same constructive anger that pissed me off to stay on the Nordic track, that pushed me to go into the fitness. So I use the word constructive anger because it was a positive force in me seeking tools to escape. And then when I reached very close to that decision, and I will explain the different events that led into that, it's in the book, then I became very depressed because I knew it was the final step. And do I jump? How do I deal with my children? They are young. And of course, after the last moment, I was worried, how is he going to survive? He doesn't even know how to write a freaking check. You remember when I talk about empathy and us being the rescuers, and how am I going to do that? But finally, I had reached, so I was depressed for a fair amount of time until I finally found the ability to say, okay, it's over, it's finished. And then, of course, all hell broke loose for about a year, and we went through the worst divorce where my life was in danger for a year. But that's a different story. That was my story. Other stories of other women that I was trying to understand from the original forum that I have, many of these women had some kind of epiphany. I remember a high-end secretary, senior administrative assistant in a university department, and she was Canadian. She was born several generations with Scottish background, many generations back. She was married to a man who emotionally abused her, and he was always putting her down. One common characteristic for many of these women is that we had more education than the men. Many of these women had more education than the men they got married, and many of these women had married to people with some bad boy characteristics, another attraction to the bad boy, the thrill. And she tolerated all of this time after time. We were kind of neighbors. But then the husband became a gambler. And what was her epiphany? He had gone to Las Vegas. She discovered that he had gone to Las Vegas to blow precious dollars instead of bringing them home. And that same night, she called the mover. She collected some furniture and her 3 kids, and she left overnight to go to her parents. When he came back, he was pissed. But you know why? Not because she left him, but because she took a particular piece of furniture that he liked very much. He was worried about the piece of furniture that she took with her, not the fact. That gives you an idea. Some women use epiphanies, sudden events. Other women grew, but you are going to see that women grew slowly towards that place where I was kind of depressed, and then there was an event that was the straw that broke the camel's back for them to walk. One of the things for women that I have seen, many other women who stayed, is the fear that he will do something bad to them. And we know that when you are in an abusive relationship, the highest risk you have is at the time you tell the abuser you are leaving. And this is what happened to my female doctor who was killed. She had just told the ex a couple of days ago. The lawyer had sent him a paper that she was divorcing him. And so this is what happened. So there are other women that I knew that remain perpetually in bad relationships, even to this date. They had all these unmet needs and whatever, but also they had the fear that he was going to do something to them or their children. And this fear, you know very well, is not unfounded. We know that, you know about feticide. I mean, I use in the book the fact that when we're talking about women killings, if you look at the United States, the troops, between 2001 to 2012, there were about 6,488 soldiers killed. In the same period, 2001 to 2012, almost 11,800 women were killed by intimate spouses. Twice as many as the troops in the States. You can imagine the magnitude of the problem. And then, this is for all kinds of women. But then we go back to the subset that I represent, the high-end professional women who are the caretakers, who make more money, and they are abused at home. And half of these women are also abused physically. I was never abused physically, but half of these women sustain physical abuse as well as emotional abuse, still behind closed doors.
It's such a broad and a deep topic, and I would love to delve deeper, but we have burned an hour of really powerful conversation. And because, like you said, there's stages, there's processes, there's overcoming paradigms, cultural paradigms, emotional paradigms, childhood story paradigms. It really is a journey, and I would love to have you kind of distill down, if a woman is hearing all of this and it's ringing some bell somewhere, what 3 things would you really want them to hear and take to heart, maybe for themselves or someone that they love? I know there's more than 3, but can you give me 3 things you really want them to hear from your heart and your experience? That's super important.
Number 1, you are not alone. Even if you think you're not alone, start talking. That's a very big thing. Number 2, look around. There are numerous tools and websites and counseling services in our countries. Make sure you familiarize yourself with all of those resources that are available. And the third big thing that I said in the beginning when we didn't have time to cover, because I did do another part of research, the young ones. We did a pilot project just to discover that in the group of 18 to 36, with 85% university education, 1 in 2 had been in emotional abuse, despite everything, the website, the support services in the institutions, everywhere. Still to this date, this is a prominent phenomenon in the young ones. And half of those who were emotionally abused were also physically abused. So please use the darn book as a conversation, not just for you, but for your daughters, for your nieces. Use it in book clubs and take the lead off. You have no idea, once the book came out, the emails I received from powerful women, for young women, middle-aged women who had never talked before, and they had never spoken to anyone, and now the lead is off, and they say, we're not alone. So what's the young ones? Give them the book. Open up conversations. Ask them about that. They are not immune. They are not out of the woods as we thought it was our generation. It's not. And the final message is, in this era, we earn more as women. We graduate from universities. There are numerous studies that show that a woman who out-earns the spouse is more likely to take more antidepressants, more anti-anxiety medications, for sure, to do more homework, housework than other women who are not out-earning their husbands, and more likely to be cheated. Because the balance has been changed out there. Men don't have the same authority in the boardrooms, so they try to recapture, as you said in your opening statement, some superiority back home. This is a new thing. We didn't have that. This is the new wave of feminism as we are educated. We're going out there. And how much more is going to be from other restrictive cultures where coercive control is more intense there. They come to a more liberal culture and all hell breaks loose. And we are countries with a lot of influx of immigrants. Don't put this in the back burner. It's a huge issue even for the young ones. So that's my message out there.
One thing I want to comment on is the point of shame. Shame only has power when we don't talk. The only way to unlock shame is actually to do the thing that feels the most shameful, which is to talk about it. The shame
Correct.
loses its power, right? When we talk about these things.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Angela, I have absolutely enjoyed our time together. And of course, I say this a lot, but this particular topic is near and dear to my heart in that I've known people that have been abused. And I think it's very important that this conversation is had. I absolutely believe that it's terribly important. So I want to make sure that you give people a place that they can go, your resources. What is your website and how can women get in contact with your resources?
So smartsuccessfulabuse.com and then info@smartsuccessfulabuse.com. And of course, because I'm a professional, they can find me everywhere in my pain and wellness center. And if they, there are all kinds of contacts.
Perfect.
I have a big organization that I run, a pain center. So just my name will bring them to all of those areas.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Angela, again, for bringing to light such an important topic. And I really thank you for doing the work so that you could come and share your story and powerful, powerful strategies for women to break the cycle of abuse. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Have a good day.
You too. I've been speaking with Dr. Angela Mailis. She is the author of the book, Smart, Successful, and Abused. She's a doctor and a specialist in pain management. If you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 130, I will have hyperlinks to all of the things that she shared. And while you're there, please leave your name and your email address. I have a gift for you when you join my tribe. And as always, if you listen on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or Stitcher, please subscribe, rate and review, and share. This message has to get out, my friends. If you yourself are the woman that sees yourself in these conversations, I encourage you to reach out, create a network of supportive people who can empower you to get out of your abusive situation. If you love someone who's in an abusive situation, buy this book, share this book. Do not be silent. In order to break the chain of shame, we must have these conversations. So please be bold, be brave, start the conversation, and keep it going. This resource could change someone's life. Thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to talking with you all again next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.